session again. Let's move out of recess and into session again for the Lincoln City Budget Committee meeting. Roll call, please, Madam Recorder.
Nick Anderson.
Here.
Gordon Eggleton.
Here.
Gary Ellingson.
Excused.
Dennis Hoagland. He's excused. Gordon McLean.
Here.
Lenny Nelson.
Here.
Chester Norikis.
Here.
Henry Quant.
Here.
Dick Ricketts.
Here.
Sue Ryan.
Here.
Roger Sprague.
Here.
James Taylor.
Here.
Alex Ward.
Here.
And Susan Walke. Here.
Let's rise for Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Play ball.
At our last meeting, I believe we completed the sewer utility operations section of the budget.
I'm not sure we got all the way through that.
All right. Let's start with that then. Page 83, sewer utility operations. Questions, please. I had a question regarding other revenue, Mr. Hawker. 85,000 budgeted.
Right. That's the two components, the septage that we get, which is
That's
from
right.
porta potties, and the 20,000 from Bimart. And I have not been able to explain the 85,000 in the current budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Let's move on to sewer summary replacement capital reserve.
Is that 84?
That is page 87.
Oh, could we go to 84?
84, sewer utility operations.
Yeah, just my question was more the jump in the contracted services from the 35 to 60.
That's right. That's the offset to the Bimart. That's the expenditure side. Okay, 20,000 of that.
Okay. Oh.
So we went from 35 to 40, plus $20,000 that we'd be spending from what we get from Bimart.
So we're adding 20 in addition to Bimart's 20?
No. We had 40. We did the Bimart settlement. We bumped it up to 60. I'm not sure how else to explain that.
I'm missing. Now, we're talking about where part of the settlement where Bimart agreed to write a $20,000 check.
Right. We covered the revenue earlier. This is the expenditure. So we had $40,000.
Why is there an expenditure? Because we're going to do something with it?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So we're going to take theirs and spend it on...
Yeah, the proposal likely will be to get an engineering study of a particular solution, or more generally, to update our plan for how to sewer the lake.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Other questions, please? Sewer utility operations.
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm going in the right direction, but on page 85, the pump station maintenance, we must have something special this current fiscal year, and then it's going back to a more normal maintenance schedule.
Do you have last
Since
year?
Was in this fiscal year.
Can you look it up? We're going to look it up, and it'll take a minute or two. Let me come back to that as soon as we get it.
Then the only other one I had on the page was the building improvements, the capital outlay in.
Catch up with you in a minute. Oh, that's, yeah. Our shop and offices at the plant don't have an adequate ventilation and heating system, and that's to replace it.
Thank you.
Looks like you budgeted for that for this year, but didn't spend it, so now it's in the next year's budget?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
They've got their hands full right now.
Actually, the only reason I'm kind of curious, because when we get over to the capital, on 87, we show, pump station upgrades of $1 million. And so I was trying to figure, that must be new pump stations over there, and I was trying to figure out the ongoing
so am I.
maintenance. Okay.
Tell me. We're talking about the current 128.
What?
We're talking about this $128,000 estimate.
Yeah, I was just trying to be reminded of why we went up this fiscal year
You're
when
not hearing the
the
question.
58 is kind of a normal. We must have added.
We had more pump replacements, generator replacements this last year.
Well, it was budgeted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's budgeted. I was just trying to, what I'm trying to figure out is, when we do pump station upgrades as a capital replacement.
Yeah, that's different than
That's what I mean.
replacing a pump or a motor or a control panel. If it's simply replacing what we've got, wore out, and we're just replacing it, it goes into maintenance. If it's a major renovation, then it goes into capital.
That helps. That's what I mean.
There is almost $60,000 of encumbered funds at the moment into this account, and that's money, items that have been ordered but not yet paid for, and it's primarily related to Wacoma Pump Station.
And that's what I was hearing from back there.
Okay.
So we all came to the same
Yeah.
answer.
Thank you. That helps me. Thanks very much.
Are we ready to move on?
Just one question.
Yes, sir.
Right down below that there, it shows that we've got $400,000 budgeted for the land tree farm, but if I'm right, that's the one we were looking for in the watershed, but it didn't materialize? Oh, it's not?
No, and this, is that what it says, tree farm?
Land. Oh, you're over on 87?
Yeah.
Page 87.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It doesn't, it really probably shouldn't say tree farm anymore, because we're not 100% comfortable that that is the solution. We are pretty comfortable that buying land, whether that's kept in pasture or whether it's converted to forest, is the long-term best solution for us.
Is this for the,
Bio-sludge,
say that again?
the sludge,
The sludge? Okay.
to a land application of sludge. We're currently fortunate in having property owners that allow us to put it on their property without compensation, and that's changing rapidly. And also, I think over time, it's going to get more and more difficult to find anybody to take this. So the most economical long-term solution is to have land within a reasonable haul distance. And I can't tell you that we can get this done in any 1 year. This may be in our budget for a number of years before a seller and buyer can come together at the right location. There's not many locations. available to us. So I'd like to continue to budget that. If the right opportunity comes along, we strike.
Okay. So what should we be calling that? Just
Well,
land?
Land acquisition.
Just sludge land?
That'd be fine. It most probably would be planted in trees, because that totally takes it out of the food chain, which we would prefer to do. That's not required. It doesn't have to be totally out of the food chain. But then you have a lot less questions from DEQ and everybody else. Trees are out of the food chain.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, any more questions on sewer utility operations?
The one above, sewer system construction takes a big jump, so there must be replacing some
That's the
pipes.
sewer system construction.
What page is that on, Mr. Mayor?
87?
Where's your spreadsheet? Well, the million is Canyon Drive.
Oh,
We're not asking about the million.
No,
We're asking about
Yeah, the
sewer
one
system construction.
right. 495.
Oh, okay. That's a number of different things. It's the collection system general upgrades of $200,000. That's almost half of it. Sailor Jack pump station upgrade, $60,000. Southwest Coast pump station upgrade, $120,000. Maryland Drive pump station upgrade, $75,000. Wastewater treatment plant receiving station improvements, $40,000. So it's 5 different projects.
do the 5 different projects, is that the million?
No, that's the 495.
So, see, I'm looking at where it says pump station upgrades, so wouldn't
Okay.
Sailor Jacks be an upgrade?
Yeah, but,
No,
I guess not.
well,
no, the list,
Bad labeling.
it is. The $1 million is strictly Canyon Drive.
That's right, yeah, that one I expected.
Okay.
And so,
But there's other pump grade upgrades in the other line item also.
okay.
I guess it's a fine line between an upgrade and a reconstruction.
If it is.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, ma'am.
what are we going to do at Canyon Drive that cost $1 million? Canyon Way,
Essentially a total replacement.
is it that bad?
The original pump station began in 1956. It's had a couple major repairs, one in the 70s, and again in, I believe, the late 80s. Basically, it's been patched together, and we can't get parts for it anymore.
Is that
To
kind
speak
of
of.
would that be sort of a normal price then for any of those that we really have to upgrade,
The big ones.
the big ones?
Or it could be more than, the real big ones, are more than that. But that's a fairly large one, and that would be a good ballpark.
Lockshire was in the neighborhood of 800,000. One in Cutler City, similar to that. They're 500,000 plus.
And we have 31 of those, or something close?
Yeah, a number of those are fairly small.
Small, they're not.
We have 3 or 4 really big ones, and then they just go down in size depending on what the capacity has to be and how much lift has to be.
But basically, with 31 pump stations and a life expectancy of 30 to 35 years, 40 years, the city is going to be replacing a pump station every year forever.
Figure that one, huh?
Well, we got way behind for a period of years, and when there was no rate adjustments for 10 years, I'm not sure we replaced any. And then we've been doing quite a few. We must have done 8 or 9 of them so far in the last
Right.
10 years.
When I think that's what's important for the public to recognize, that, one, we have a lot of pump stations and what the price of them are and the age, so.
And these pump stations are required because of the topography, is it?
That's correct. Yeah, and also when we compare rates, and that question came up before, or last night? Boy, wow. When you compare rates, I think we're really truly unusual in the number of lift stations we have. You might find another city that has that many per population, but you won't find many. Cities of 20,000 commonly have 2 or 3 or 4.
I actually printed out some off of websites this afternoon of other cities. Ashland is asking for 12.7% in their water rates and 10% in their sewer rates. And then they go on to talk about $30 million of maintenance projects that they have in sewer and another $10 million in water. Seaside is 3.5% in water, 4.5% in sewer. Portland is 8.1% in water, 5% in sewer. Springfield is 4%, which is their sewer only. And it goes on to quote Eugene, residents and businesses may be faced with annual sewer rate increases of 4%. Stormwater is 6%. Until 2018 and possibly beyond. Just to give you a little idea of what's going on around the state.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tierney. Any other questions regarding sewer summary replacement capital reserve, page 87 and 88?
Now, I'll mention on page 88, there's 2 transfers. One is coming from the system development charges and going to paying the debt on the sewer treatment plant. There's a transfer of $400,000. And then there's also a transfer into the sewer construction fund of $600,000. And we got to remember, when we let the contract on the Phase 1B of the sewer plant, it was approximately $8 million. We only had bond capacity of $7 million. So to make up that difference, we've been planning this for a long time, but this is where it was coming from, was out of the system development charges of the sewers.
Thank you, Mr. Tierney. Hearing no questions, let's move on to sewer construction.
That's just the sewer plant. I think that fund will eventually go away. Am I correct?
Yes. This is the fund where the bond proceeds went into to finish the sewer plant. So $7 million we sold in 2011. Actually, if you go over to the left-hand side, you can see the $7 million coming in. And this is to complete the plant, so that all the bond proceeds are spent first, then the system development charges to make up the difference will come next, and at the end it'll be zero. So this will be closed out next year.
And we don't, by the way, on the estimate of $5.8 million for this year, that's an estimate. We don't know exactly how much the contractor will get done.
Where that number came from is actually from the engineer on the project, and I asked him to estimate where they would be at June 30th. I've never been right in 20-some years on these type of estimates that overlap into 2 fiscal years. It's the best information that was available.
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
The difference between the budgeted amount of 11 and 12, which was $7 million plus a little bit of change, and the 6.8 that was actually spent, Is the difference between that the cost of selling the bonds?
Not sure I understand.
Well, I can answer this part. If you go over to 2010-11, where that's $7 million,
Right.
okay, go down into the expenditure category. There's an amount of $12,713. That was the bond issuance cost.
Okay, but we don't, we show that we're estimating 68, but we actually got 7 million, then, is that right? 6.8 versus 7?
No, the 6.8 million was the cash carry forward from the prior year. You turn the page, I think it's here. Look at the bottom of the 2010-2011 column. You see the 6,893?
Oh, I've got you, okay.
That's the fund balance carry forward to this year. Yeah, it's mostly the bond proceeds that we spent some of it too.
Okay.
The bond issuance was about 0.2%.
Okay. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, a donation in this one? I appreciate the citizens or somebody donating, but
I'm thinking we've told a whole bunch of lies tonight. Unintended lies. Well, you want to go back to that $85,000, folks?
Well, that's what I thought this would be.
Oh, yeah.
That one is correct, 85,000. But I think we may have doubled up while I was gone.
Why did you leave?
well, it makes sense that you wouldn't have the 20 in the construction, in the bond one. So I
don't think it belongs here. My spreadsheet, so you guys changed it while I was gone.
I think we're going to want to see an amendment to take that out.
All right.
It won't.
No, it doesn't. You can leave it in. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
We're just going to underrun that.
Okay.
you don't need an amendment.
It's a pretty big dollar amount in this fund, and that's not going to be material. I think we did do the revenue twice. I think I had Ron put it in, and then I asked, when he was gone, I asked Debbie if it was in there, and she didn't see it and put it in. I think that's what happened.
All right.
No problem.
More questions on sewer construction? Hearing none. Let's move on to tax levy calculations. Is this different to Mr. Tierney than the last?
No, it's exactly a copy of the page that you saw in front of the general fund. The reason it's here is because we're now getting into the bond section. There's a tax levy for the open space bonds. There's a tax levy for the sewer bonds.
Right. But that does not change the permanent tax rate.
No.
Thank you.
Permanent tax rate never changes. It's always 4.0996.
Never changes.
Never changes. That was permanent tax rate due to ballot measure 50.
But the valuation that it goes against changes.
Right. The assessed valuation will increase, but the tax rate does not change. Bond tax rates can, because all the bond section of your property tax statement is outside of ballot measure 50 and outside of ballot measure 5. Okay. These are voter-approved increases in property tax.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
And so there's no limitation to
All right.
ballot measure 50. The 40996 is strictly a general fund, and that is governed by ballot measure 50, and it's a permanent rate.
Thank you. Questions? Hearing none, let's move on to long-term debt bond amortization.
Okay, this next page is really strictly right out of, this is how we show it in the audit report, this is how we've shown it in the budget book for years. It shows each individual bond issue to the outside. I prefer, when I asked you last night, if you would go to H1, maybe if we turn to H1, I prefer this format a lot better, which will be at the end of section 4. Let's see, just a minute.
It's not quite the end, almost the end.
Not quite the end. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, there'll be an H1.
Mm-hmm.
It's just before the narrative on the departments, different departments.
If you look in the lower right-hand corner, most of them are page numbered.
Everybody with me?
I believe so.
Okay.
Everybody there?
Yep.
All right.
Okay, let's look at the very first column. Okay. And this is the current year that we're in right now. And what I want you to look at is the very bottom figure. The city has spent $5.7 million in bond repayment this fiscal year. If you go up, this one, this schedule includes not only the city's bonds, the urban renewal bonds, it also includes the interfund loans that we have. So this is much more complete than the other one. If you come up to the urban renewal one, we paid off the 2003 urban renewal bonds this year, the $875,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that saved us about $35,000 in future interest payments.
Well done.
That's the reason I wanted you to look at that column. Now let's go to the budget column. And you can see that I've got these broken out by water categories, and then the sewer, and then what we call other, and then urban renewal. And I want you to pay, the bottom of this thing is $5 million. It's the year we're going into. The very last one in the water section, there's a $507,000 payment. Okay. That is almost the final payment on the water tank.
Yes.
If you come over one more column, you'll see it's $126,000 for the following year.
Mm-hmm.
We have one more quarterly payment due in the following year. So as of September 1st, 2013, this starts dropping dramatically. If you go along the total water and watch how the number decreases rapidly, because we have another one that's being paid off in 2014-15.
Yes.
If we keep coming down the budget column, the sewer is pretty explanatory. We have two bond issues, and they go across, and we owe a lot of money on sewer projects. And this was mostly for the wastewater treatment plant. And this goes, one of them is 14 more years, and one of them is 19 more years. The one that is 19 more years, I'm actually in discussions right now to possibly refinance that particular bond issue. And the savings could be very significant. But it's going to take some time on that one. As we keep coming down that column, the very next one is the open space bond.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the final payment on that one. It's much larger than the payment we made this year, because I'm picking up what would have been paid the following year. We're going to prepay it.
Great.
And so there will be no tax levy in 2013, 2014 for the open space bonds. So that will actually reduce our property tax.
Excellent.
As we keep coming down that one, the next one is the library bond, what we call the facilities library. When we did the water tank bond issue, $2 million went for the water tank. We also borrowed $1 million for the library expansion. So this one's being paid out of the facility capital fund. As you can see, we got one more payment, and then we have one quarterly payment in the following year, and that one is done.
You'll see at the bottom line, of course, is quite a decline over time. But the most significant immediate thing is that the water funds will be able to start doing capital projects again fairly quickly. After this particular budget year, it goes down quite a bit, and we really have two options. And if you want to look at the maybe later after we're done tonight, but take a hard look at the 5-year projection. Now, it includes 2 borrowings so that we can accelerate the capital construction. We don't have to do that. We could do it pay-as-you-go. But if interest rates are really low and we've got some critical projects out there, we might consider a borrowing to do 3 or 4 projects for a 2-year period of time, good large projects. For example, we have a very fragile section of 10-inch main just crossing the Schooner Creek Bridge and heading south to Cutler City. That becomes part of our link when our main transmission main is down. So if we upgrade that and we lose Schooner Creek line again, we won't be having to worry about peak capacity. And last time that happened, even though the Drift Creek line was in, the 10-inch line was in our way. We were able to supply water, but we couldn't have done that in a high demand period. So that's one of the many projects on the list. Do you want to name a few of the other water projects? It should be on the tip of your tongue.
Well, there's a bunch of them. We have $5 to $6 million worth of projects.
Yeah, I'd like to take a minute or two and cover those because I think it's important that you know, although bond debt is going way down and gives us some opportunities, we're still calling for a rate increase because we do have a lot of capital needs coming up.
Most of them are, well, basically they're on page D2. On the right hand is D2. And it's, if you look in the column projected for 2013-14, wait till you get there. But starting with the projected 2013-2014, everything in that column and to the right are projects that we have recognized that need to be done in the near future.
The one I've just mentioned is that first one at 200,000. Schooner Creek boring is going under the Schooner Creek for the transmission main. We're getting some bad scouring. We have made application to FEMA for funding on that, but who knows what will happen. The big one there is the High School Drive check valve. What happens right now if our transmission main, let's say in 101, breaks, our 24-inch transmission main breaks, let's say at 32nd Street, south, 32nd Street. Before we could get valves closed off, we would have lowered the level in our water tanks precipitously. This would, depending on where a check valve is, this would prevent some of that occurring. And the most critical section is between 101 and High School Drive, that intersection, and the plant. So if that breaks anywhere through there, this check valve would prevent the tanks from emptying. We can't say that that's going to happen, but if it does, we could be very, very low on water. Ron, what a couple other big projects we've got in here?
Well, the one that you mentioned, the Cutler City Schooner Creek Bridge, is a $900,000 project. I've got that spread over 2 years at $450,000 each, beginning in 2014-15. There's $250,000 in here for relocating water lines due to the ODOT project and the gaps. There's $600,000 in here for a pump station at the 19th Street Reservoir.
And so on. But
Yeah,
the point is that we can begin, in not this next year's budget, but the following year, we can begin to seriously talk about some of these capital projects that we aren't able to fund at the current time.
Questions, please. Hearing none. Shall we move on to open space bonds? Page 93.
Well, basically, all the individual, now we're getting into the individual bond, and what you're going to see is what the revenue source is. And I should have showed you back there on H1, on the far right-hand column, it will tell you what revenue is dedicated to each bond issue. And you can see it individually. If you want to go through these individual ones, the open space bond is 100% property tax. And then down under the expenditure side, you'll just see the principal and interest that's being paid. The sewer bonds are a little bit, I'm now on page 94. The sewer bonds are a little bit different because they are paid by 3 different revenue sources, the biggest one being property tax. And then you'll see there's a transfer of $200,000 for the sewer operating fund. So sewer rates are partially paying these bonds. And then you'll see the transfer from the system development charge fund. So there's 3 revenue sources to pay basically $1.6 million of debt each year. On page 96, this is a water refunding bond, which means I've already refinanced this bond once. And we had significant savings, but that was about 3 or 4 years ago. This is the original bond issue that expanded the water treatment plant in 1997. And this is the one that will be paid off actually 2 years early, because it was a 20-year bond, but it will be paid off June 1st, 2015. The revenue source for this bond issue is 100% water rates. Next page, page 97. This water bond issue was the $4 million bond issue of water from Drift Creek to the water treatment plant, or other source of water that we didn't have before. This is the one. This one extends out to 2018. It was a 12-year bond. Again, this one I'm using as much water system development charges as that's available, but there is not much available. You can see there's $70,000 And then the rest of it is coming from water rates, $365,000. The expenditures, again, are nothing more than principal and interest. On page 98, this one is called the Bond Redemption Fund, and this is the one that I talked about earlier, the $3 million bond issue. $2 million was for the water tank, $1 million was for the library expansion. And you can see that the revenue sources are from the water operating fund and from the facility capital fund. And this is the one that has 5 quarters left. And that's all of your bond issues.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
the idea of SDCs is to pay a proportional share that is of increases in the utilities caused by expansion of property. That's the basic theory behind it all. Right now, there's hardly any money in there, and so any expansion that we're doing, we're pretty much paying for by taxes or by rates. If we expand, will that proportion change? Then more of it will come from the SDCs, and less of it will come from the taxpayers and the current residents of the city? How do we ever catch up when we're doing the expansions now and we don't have the money now from the development?
That's one of those questions where over a 20, 30-year period, hopefully it balances out. Basically, the approach that I have taken, the water, sewer, SD, or all of the SDCs. Water and sewer has 2 different parts. They have a small part that's called a reimbursement fee. That portion we use to replace existing infrastructure, but it's the smallest part of the SDC. The bigger part is what they call the improvement fee. The improvement fee can only be used to expand the system, as you mentioned, but the project also has to be on the capital improvement plan. You may have a project that expands the system, but if it's not on that list, you can't spend money on it.
Well, also, part of your answer is how we manage the SDCs. When we were getting SDCs rolling in here in boom years, 3 or 4 boom years, we reserved some of the sewer SDCs in anticipation that boom wouldn't last, so that we could smooth that trend out and not have a big peak in rates because of that. So, of course, that can only go on so long.
And the other thing that the improvement part of the SDC can pay is the bond indebtedness, or you borrowed money for a project that was on the list. Now you can use the SDC to repay that bond. And that's mostly what I've used the improvement SDCs for, is to repay sewer bonds, repay water bonds of projects that were on the list. Okay. The whole thing's a real timing. I mean, it's a real timing thing. And so you just try to manage the SDCs as best you can, do the projects that are critical to be done. And, some of the repayment comes back on rates. Now, in water, we have no property tax levy whatsoever in water. Okay. It's only in sewer that we have a property tax levy.
Any more questions regarding bonds, debt service funds? Hearing none. I see nothing else on the agenda that we have to address in the three-ring binder here. For the benefit of the public, there's a section in the binder regarding responsibilities of various departments of the city. I find that to be very interesting reading. For anybody who's interested, it's on the website, and there's a copy of this document in the library. I would entertain comments from citizens present at this time. If we have anybody in the audience who wishes to speak. Hearing none. Let's move on to comments from Budget Committee members. Starting with Mr. McLean, please, if you have any.
I have done a very educational experience. This has been a very educational experience, and I have to say this is an extraordinary exercise in budget work. I've seen lots of budgets. This is good. I'm sorry I have to adjourn myself right now for a 7 o'clock rehearsal thing, so I have a very positive feeling about this process and the budget that was presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Ms. Nelson.
In general, this budget follows a consistent plan that we've started out on several years ago, and it seems like a logical place. I think the only area that concerns me a great deal is the sudden change in the way we're going to manage the resources of the Visitor and Convention Bureau. Such an abrupt change, I think, needs to be monitored very closely and to see what effect it has primarily on the shoulder seasons, which has always been a concern of the city, that when we give up things like Antique Week, unless somebody rushes in to take it over, how much effect will that have on the number of people that we can expect to come to Lincoln City in February, which has always been problematical. So while the budget for it, I don't have a real problem with the direction. I think we need to monitor very closely, and if we've made a I don't want to say error, but if we've made a poor choice, we need to be able to go backwards and look at maybe there's some mix between the two that's more appropriate than us doing all the events and less of the advertising. Other than that, this budget looks fine to me.
Thank you. Mr. Ward?
I don't have any comments, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate you taking us through this, though.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
I'm going to share some of the concern that Lenny mentioned about the Visitor and Convention Bureau budget. Obviously, it's stated it's in somewhat of a state of flux right now in terms of what's going on there, and yet the budget increases by 20%, which is $275,000 increase, which is a lot of money, given that it is in a state of flux and there seems to be a lot of uncertainty. So I personally have some concern about approving that budget, just given the state of flux and the large amount of the increase. And that's the only concern I have.
Thank you. Mr. Ricketts?
I have a motion I would like the committee to consider.
Yes, sir.
I move that the Budget Committee add $120,000 from contingency to the budget so the council may consider hiring a person to assist the city manager and perhaps assume other duties.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion, please.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
The reason that I'm offering this motion is not necessarily that the council would authorize such a position, but that I think the council should investigate whether such a position is warranted.
And it may not come to pass this coming year, but it may come to pass the year after. As I understand it, unless the Budget Committee authorizes some funding, the council would not have the opportunity to consider this.
Council can increase the budget by a given amount. Do you, Ken? For 10% for a fund. So, as in the general fund, obviously that would cover. Plus, we have contingency. You can all spend out of contingency. If you look at the general fund summary budget on page the ending. Where are we here? How much is it? We have 1.6 million in contingency that could be spent by council without any further action of the Budget Committee.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I haven't looked into the budget law just recently, but I thought that the 10% was in each major category of each fund. And it's not, you can't not spend more than 10% more in personnel, 10% more in materials and services. It's the whole fund. So any portion of that 1.6 million, well, the total fund, which would be what, 4 million something?
Well, the total fund balance, 2.8 million. Again, we try to reserve a portion of that for cash flow. The rest is surplus, and we budgeted most of that as contingency for an emergency. We tend not to spend the contingency. What I'm saying is that council could, if this budget were adopted as is, council could still make that change.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I guess I'm, at this point, I'm not going to be voting for the motion, but I think Mr. Ricketts' point is a good one, is what I heard is not just the money, but the money might allow the discussion for such a position. And actually, we've had that discussion and continue to have that discussion, and we will continue to. So I don't know that the money needs to actually, be allotted. I think the point is a good one, and it's the last couple of times it's been in the narrative. Mr. Hawker has pointed it out, again, as a gentle reminder for us all. I just don't see the need for the actual movement of money.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I might be more inclined to vote for it, and I don't think we can constrain this motion to it, but in my mind, one of the ways to do this very prudently, and I think it was mentioned in Mr. Hawker's narrative, is to assign some of the responsibilities of the Parks and Recreation Director to this new person, and allow us to go another year or two or more without hiring a new Parks and Recreation Director. That would have less impact on the budget, and we could see how this personal assistant thing was working out and whether we needed to make that a full-time only job there. That would make me more comfortable with the idea of expanding that, the overall workforce to include one more person.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Yes, sir.
I had that in mind when I added, and perhaps assume other duties. But I wanted to leave the council with maximum discretion, and I wanted to give an indication of the monies that would be involved in authorizing this.
If I may speak to that briefly, one of my major concerns is that someday I'm going to give this job up. At least I'm going to give up Lincoln City. And after being here 12 years and there's an awful lot of knowledge that resides in this position. At the same time, our half-time financial planner is also probably in a similar boat of not being here forever. And between the two, the corporate knowledge is pretty considerable. I'd like to see some of that transferred, if possible, well before I leave the city. And it's just something to keep in mind.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
years and years and years and years ago, when I first came to the city, we did have an assistant city manager.
Oh, is that right?
And that person also oversaw HR. So besides being an assistant to the city manager, it also took care of the hiring and firing, interviewing, and that position. I would be comfortable with something like that. Because in everything I've worked with over the 51 years, I just can't believe an HR position with 126 people. And this is nothing against any individuals, please, but I just can't believe that it can fill 40 hours a week.
Actually, with the regulations and laws that we face, it's probably more than that. In fact, it is more than
Then
that.
I'm wrong.
It really, truly is. I've seen that grow every single year in my 30 years of being city manager. And we actually are facing some pretty serious challenges right now in HR in the way of OSHA compliance, in the way of documented what's
Such policies?
no. So our documentation of new workers as being I-9.
Oh, the employee file documents?
Yeah, an awful lot of problems in that regard. We are undertaking ADA compliance issues, which is being split between HR and our city engineer. We easily could, honestly, we easily could use another person to do an awful lot of the things that are hitting us. It has really grown.
Every 2 out of 3 years, there's union negotiations. That takes a tremendous amount of time, and recently we've taken on, or HR has taken on, market surveys, which is also a great deal of time, so position has perhaps grown.
And we, for the most part, don't, like we're entering into ASME negotiations right now. We used to retain outside counsel to do that. We're, for the most part, going to do that in-house with HR. So, no, that position has just grown dramatically in the responsibilities.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I agree with Mr. Ricketts in that this is something we should be considering, the assistant's job. However, I don't think that the Budget Committee needs to make a motion in order for us to do that. We've heard the discussion. We've been in discussion about this for some time. So I just don't feel that we need to have a motion to continue discussing that, and I won't vote for it. But I am glad that he brought it up, and it's something that I think we need to give a lot of serious consideration to.
Further discussion, please. Hearing none. We have a motion on the floor and a second. The motion is that the Budget Committee add $120,000 from contingency to the budget so that the City Council may consider hiring a person to assist the City Manager and perhaps assume other duties. Roll call vote, please, Madam Recorder.
Dick Anderson,
No.
Gordon Eggleton,
No.
let's see, Lenny Nelson,
No.
Chester Norakis,
Yes.
Henry Quant,
No.
Dick Ricketts,
Yes.
Sue Ryan,
Yes.
Roger Sprague,
No?
James Taylor,
Yes.
Alex Ward,
No.
Susan Walke,
No.
you have 7 noes and 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses. Motion fails.
Motion fails. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Ricketts.
general comments. As always, my thanks to the rest of the committee and to the staff for fulfilling an important function.
Thank you. Mr. Sprague, any comments?
Yes, I'm concerned about the ADA exposure that the city faces. And I know we've got something, what is it, 80,000, 80 or 85, maybe 90,000 that's set aside for that, but I just feel that's inadequate. And I would like to see us bump that up some so that we can get this thing rolling as soon as possible and make sure that we have our ducks in a row.
Could I just, I have that topic as too, could we maybe engage in some discussion?
Certainly.
Motion or
Certainly.
anything happens, but Mr. Sprague, I share that. I came up, and so I'm looking for kind of confirmation, but I found that we have in the budget around 62,000 urban renewal, 50,000, and 12,000 general fund towards what I interpreted to be ADA plan. Then I found, through the evening, we found 19,000 in streets, another 100,000 urban renewal labeled sidewalks, 4,000 in parks, 15,000 in VCB for some ADA stuff. That's 138,000. So collectively, that's 200,000 in ADA. And in our questions last night, what I heard Mr. Hucker say is, gee, you got to have a plan before you can project. But even so, I see some projects being taken care of. But I share, I guess I'm looking for information now, because I know we had a bunch of complaints, of which we brought in Bob Pike. And I'm not sure those repairs have been done. And then we heard about the lift at the pool at the community center and stuff. So I guess the question I had, is there a way we could, in anticipation of future needs, start putting some money into a fund? And I'm wondering, is facilities capital fund, for example, I don't know if that's where it would go, but something that it just moves it, is a placeholder, so that when we get to 2013-14 budget, would that be next year's when we're here, and we add more to it, it's not as big a hit. Take some now, take some next year, because I'm betting, the way I'm reading this is we've got money to do a plan and some projects moving ahead and funded, but I'm just thinking of a way to level out a budget hit maybe over 2 years versus one.
Yeah, and I don't want to mislead the committee into thinking that we can have a complete plan for what's in this budget, okay? We can...
Oh, the 62,000 won't be enough for...
I don't know. I think
okay.
until we get a lot of inventorying done, I don't know that that's going to complete it. I'd be surprised if we can have a complete plan in 1 year. I'd be very surprised. I think we can have most of the elements and a lot of the inventorying done, but until that inventorying is complete, you don't really have a transition plan.
Okay. Is there any sense or value in trying to touch a couple of budget years and start building? And I go to the street overlay thought to how you plan
it would strike me as not a bad idea to create a fund, a separate fund for this, although I'm anti-funds. We've got 44 funds or something, and
You could, through, I believe, a resolution, designate a portion of our current fund balance as being,
but see, because it's in so many different funds, it would be nice to consolidate those resources into a single place by transfers, into a separate fund where everything can be, or at least the planning and administration of the ADA compliance. Now, the capital projects, I don't know if that belongs there or not. But I hate to see us create another fund, but I don't know of another way to take resources. Otherwise, it's going to be jumping all around like what we've got now.
And that's really what, because I went through it, was trying to make it, and it's quite an impact when you pull it together, 200,000. So,
yeah.
But I'm betting that's not going to be enough once we do the plan and identify the issues. So somehow I'm trying to think of moving some money today into a future expenditure fund and start adding to it.
we can do that if you'd like. There's
I guess the question, and not speaking for Mr. Sprague, but I think what he might be suggesting, then how do we go do that? Is this?
My concern is that cities are vulnerable when the feds decide to come down and take a look at our city and all of a sudden find that we're not compliant. That can be horribly expensive. And so my thought is that we need to start working on the plan now, and it's going to take a lot of money. Once we got the plan, then we got tons of money it's going to take to fix all those non-compliances. So I guess my question would be, if we are saying, well, we've got funding now and we're looking to hire a consultant, or we're putting together a plan, but we don't have a plan, are we still vulnerable, or will we get a pass for a while on that?
Well, what my perception is that we get a pass if we're pretty aggressive. But Heather, do you want to talk about this? Heather back there. She is more knowledgeable about this area than I am. What's your perception of it?
Well, Stephanie Reed is my partner in this, and she's much more knowledgeable about the structures. But
Heather?
I'm happy to, sorry, I always think my voice is too loud in things. I'm happy to kind of summarize what I think the steps are. Is that what you're looking for?
No. Where do you think our exposure is?
Wherever, I think we have lots of different exposure areas. I think if you're interacting with a person, so any of our programs, we have people who tend to be very helpful, and they will, if somebody needs Braille, they will figure it out. And so I think we're less vulnerable in our programs, but ultimately we need to have preparation for any of those kinds of contingencies. And at this point, we don't have that written down and planned out. But my understanding from our talking with our consultants is that the priority place to start is with an assessment of all of our highway, our major roadways, our sidewalks, our curb cuts, our public parking, our private parking associated with our different facilities, our parks, our beach accesses. Those are the places they would start. And then they would go to each facility, and then within each facility there's a tremendous number of programs. If you start breaking down every customer interaction we can possibly have, there's a lot, and each one of those is technically a program. There's a lot of programs that each one needs to be analyzed.
So I guess the question is, let's say, let's answer Mr. Sprague's comment about if the feds come in. Now, we're not talking about an individual complaint, but the feds come in and review our program. At what point do they say, hey, you're on track, you get a pass? And at what point do they haul you into court or whatever?
I'm not an expert on that. I can tell you a little bit about Bend, which has had this happen. And they did not have a written down plan. They did have a complaint from a person who was a citizen who had an actual experience where he was not able to have access to, I can't remember if it was a facility or a program. But they systematically went through everything. If you look at Ben's plan, it's over 1,000 pages. It's an inventory of every single inch of Bend. I mean, every single inch. It's a tremendous undertaking. And so you do an inventory first, and then you do what's called a self-assessment, self-evaluation. I've heard it called both. So you analyze, that's where you kind of bring your brain into it, and you analyze the compliance level of each. There's some that are marked.
You're going through the steps, but at
urgent.
what point do the feds say you're in non-compliance, we're going to attempt to fine you?
I can't
Okay.
speak to that. At whatever point they feel that we have not done our due diligence, that we have not exercised good faith.
What did it cost Bend in fines for that? I know it was considerable.
Yeah, there were fines, and then they also forced them, as you're saying, to quickly put together a plan, and then it was no longer their transition plan. They didn't say it's a 10-year plan. They said, you get this done in 2 years. So the money and there were layoffs as a result of it. It was a pretty extensive impact. I don't know the dollar amount.
That's one of the reasons.
But all of that information is on their website. It's actually, they've put a lot of information out there to try to help other cities learn from their experience. So, and they have an ADA coordinator, which is hired a full-time, 40-hour-a-week job with an assistant.
That's one of the reasons why I was thinking that needs to be a priority item. And my understanding is that as far as the inventory is concerned, that we may not be capable of doing our own inventory. We need to hire outside.
We're not currently.
Yeah.
Whether we can get training along the way to do that, we're going to look at that possibility of partnering one of our associate engineers with whoever does the inventory to see if we can do some of that ourselves. But it's a little more complicated than it looks like. Fortunately, and I don't know how good it is, but fortunately, we've just found that ODOT has done the inventory of 101, and it's pretty recent. And so that may be a very big step forward.
They have a 75-year plan.
Mr.
I'll
Chair,
just make that comment.
Yes.
I'm reasonably sure that the council will be considering how to expedite this process. I'm wondering what action the Budget Committee, if any, should take.
If we create a separate fund, there's a lot of changes that need to be made to this budget. Let me get Debbie back up here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Chair,
There's no motion on the floor, and until there is, perhaps we don't need to go through this. Mr. Mayor?
yeah, I want to make sure that there, from this committee, that there's concurrence, and that if more money is needed in this category, then, that this committee concur with that, I guess is where I'm going. And I was thinking, with no idea, but the $62,000 was enough for a plan. What I'm hearing now, it really isn't.
yeah, I think it's a multi-year effort to get the plan.
So then, we're thinking we can do the plan in phases. So that still might take care of year one phase, but I guess I'm thinking then, in addition, to start building a war chest for the actual project enhancements, changes that the plan will call for, rather than getting stuck in one budget year for a multitude of them. So if the committee has an action, it would be moving some money into a futuristic fund, is what I'm suspecting.
Like a reserve fund.
Or some kind of reserve fund, yeah.
Another way to handle this is to create line items, a line item. The only line item I think that we have that's actually labeled ADA, is there one? There isn't one. Is to create a line item in the major funds for ADA compliance issues and show funding in that. And if the funding isn't spent, we can roll it over to the following year. That's another way of doing it.
But right now, we only have, $200,000, So
And some of that's for improvements,
Right.
obviously.
Right. So I guess I'm, if we put 100,000, just to pick a number, into a reserve fund, if the committee, a motion was made and the committee started building, 100,000 isn't very much, but,
Mr. Chair, let me say a motion.
Well, are you finished, Mr. Mayor?
no,
Oh, I'm sorry.
well, I'm looking for some answers. Rather than making a motion, then we have to figure it out. I was trying to hope that we could have the direction as to where, the best way to do it. But
If you did create a reserve fund and move monies into it, you'd also need to specify which funds you're going to pull money from, and we'd need to add a transfer line in each of those funds to move money out.
Well, I guess my thought would be just from the current contingency fund, not to mess with this current budget where projects are buried and the plan is there, or some funding, but it would only to start building a reserve fund. So it would come from the contingency reserve fund into a designated.
But to get money into a new fund, you have to transfer it, which is an expense. I mean, you can take it out of contingency and put it into a transfer line, but you still have to create the transfer line.
I have a question, Mr. Hawker. Is this something that the city council can initiate and leave this year's budget as it is?
Well, I think it's a really useful discussion we're having, because it troubles me that we can't point to, again, I think our best defense, first of all, we want to do what's right, and we want to do what's legal.
Yes.
But our best defense is an aggressive program. And it would be nice to be able to point to, we have this allocated. It bothers me to have to hunt through this budget. And, yeah.
It was.
Right. But I'm struggling with a way that administratively is a nice, clean way to handle this.
Mr. Chair.
One moment, please.
If you wanted to get something into this this proposed budget, one option too is just to add a line in the general non-departmental fund called ADA review or something, and move money from contingency into that line item. That would only take money out of the general fund, but it's a start, and you put some money there.
Yeah. That'd be the cleanest, easiest way to do it.
And then I think if we really want to be able to see it easily, I think creating the ADA expense codes in the different funds is a good way to start tracking.
Yeah, in hindsight, now, I wish I would have done that. I wish we would have put a line item in ADA compliance, ADA construction, 2 line items. I wish in hindsight I would have done that. So, because we can print out, for example, somebody says, what do you have in ADA? We could print out that line item for all funds.
It's very easy.
And there it is. There's the total. There's what we've budgeted. That's what we've spent. And so in hindsight, I wish I'd have done that. And it certainly would be a good move, I think, on the Budget Committee to change the budget to include those line items in all the funds that there's ADA funding. And if you want to put more money into those line items, just move it out of contingency.
Mr. Chair?
One moment, please, Mr. Sprague. Mr. Ricketts?
Well, I'm not sure of the technicalities, but the mayor mentioned $100,000, and we have 200 now. So I'm wondering if the committee could just increase each ADA line item by 50%. That would give the $100,000 that you mentioned.
And, yeah, I guess I'm more looking for a futuristic, knowing that the 100,000 is just a drop in the bucket for any kind of changes. I'm looking for a more firmer reserve fund that we start adding to.
So would you like to have a motion that there be a reserve fund created?
And that's what Debbie and I were just speaking about. That's what she just came back to us with.
It's an option. It is more complicated and involved than other options, but, I mean, it's always an option.
Well, wasn't that what, when I was starting to write down, to move dollars from contingency fund to,
We just create a new expense line called ADA, well, we create two, ADA review plan and ADA construction. So one would be an operational account, one would be capital. And then you just move money from contingency into those in the general fund.
That doesn't create a reserve fund,
Okay.
but any funds put into that will be quite obvious if they're not spent, can roll forward.
and that's what you were making that point, that
All
is
I'm
that
looking
it...
forward is a way to
yes.
get this done.
I hear you. Okay, so that would accomplish what we've kind of talked about then, of getting more money into the funds. If they aren't spent in this budget year, we've captured them and just keep rolling them forward.
Well, it'd become pretty obvious, okay?
Because we've
And
got
that's the
net
first thing of budgeting, is to make the issue obvious.
Okay.
Mr. Sprague.
Cannot the city council, during the fiscal year, amend the budget? In other words...
Mr. Tierney is nodding his head yes.
In November of this next year, cannot the city council just decide to
Sure.
amend that?
Yeah. But, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is get as close as we can to what you want in this budget.
I would rather do that. I'm just concerned about the time and whether there's enough time to do that between now and the time we have to pass the budget.
Oh, I think you can do this by, I think you could do this by simple amendment.
Oh, okay.
Not
More-
more simple, but...
I was looking for Debbie to nod her head. It's okay.
Well, yeah, it depends which option. If it's to create a reserve, a new fund, separate fund, then it's a little more complex. If it's to create line items in all the funds that have ADA funding in them, move that funding in them and increase it if you wish, that's a relatively simple two motions.
I think we should do that.
Does that now, I guess you and I were jumping in on that, Mr. Sprague, does that seem to satisfy, it consolidates the issue so we can find it and show it, as well as pump it up a little, and it captures it? Does that meet your objectives?
That meets mine as long as the amount that we're pumping is what Mr. Ricketts said of 50% in each one of those categories.
So, I was thinking in the 100,000 range. Is that?
Well, that's what the 50% would do, is my understanding.
So, if any other, I'd make a motion, but I'm still listening to what people might.
We can have further discussion after the motion.
That's true.
Well, no, once the motion's made, there's no point in discussing it, unless you want to do some interesting parliamentary maneuvering, which I don't think you do. I think you want to have your discussion.
Well, I believe after any motion and any second, there's still time for discussion.
You have a motion, I believe.
No, we don't.
No, we haven't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No.
Never mind.
I will move that we increase each line item with marked ADA by 50%, which should yield a total of a $100,000 increase in allocation for ADA spending. And I hope that's the simplest way to handle this right now.
I would go one step further and include to create and move the money into two new line items in those respective funds, ADA planning and compliance and ADA construction, or ADA improvements, rather.
Yep.
And move the monies into two line items called ADA planning and ADA projects.
ADA improvements would probably be better.
Improvements, right, okay.
There's a motion on the floor, and we have a second. Further discussion.
I have to take a minute to make sure that that 50% doesn't jeopardize any fund.
Yeah, I wanted to be sure we knew.
So that would include the
Exactly
general
which
fund.
items we're taking 50%.
Now, the interesting part is some of those are in urban renewal.
I just want to make sure
We
we can.
can't do urban renewal. Urban renewal, urban renewal agency can do that when they consider adopting the budget. But the ones in here are the general fund,
Yes, there was 12 in general fund.
street, which street fund?
201, there's 19,000.
Which fund is that called?
Street operations.
Street operations. There's something else.
There's 15,000 in VCD for restroom upgrades.
And 50.
All those could afford the 50% increase.
There's 4,000 in parks.
All those could afford the 50% increase. I think that covers it, all but urban renewal. And
Yeah. And actually, the general fund has 17,600, because there's a little bit in the police and a little bit in the recreation center. So together, it's 17,600. I'm adding it up here.
You
Well,
want
for-
a calculator? I thought the right one to go through.
Urban renewal had a total of 150,000, so
You can't touch it.
Can't.
Well, you can later.
50,000.
We got some work to do.
Yeah. Better be more than 50%.
It's 55,600 if you exclude urban renewal.
What is,
The total that's in the budget for ADA.
what's in the budget?
There's not much in the general fund, 17,000. You could increase the general fund.
You could go more on the general fund.
That's where the contingency lies, is it not?
Well, no, there's contingencies in the other funds.
But I mean, the majority of the contingency, is that not in the general fund? Yeah.
Yes.
So what is the, what is the easiest, is it, say, just since we're kind of targeting 100,000, would it be simpler just to stay with the creating the line items in all the funds, and, move 100,000 into the general fund, or increase that line item to 100,000 in the general fund?
I don't think so, because I think then you're putting more into planning and not enough. See, the general fund isn't going to do construction, okay? That's streets, that's urban renewal. So I can see the general fund bearing maybe most of the planning costs, but not the construction costs, which should be in streets. Property belongs in streets, property belongs in urban renewal, BCB improvements of their facilities.
I think we'd take suggestions of how
Well,
how to word this thing.
You could just say add a certain amount in this fund and a certain amount in that fund.
I mean, if you take the two things, one is move the existing money into those two, that's part of the motion. And if you would simply increase the general fund allocation $50,000, and then when you get to urban renewal, take a look at that, you're going to have the money that you need.
So how do we amend the motion, or?
I think the part of the motion is already, the only part that you need to change is, instead of a 50% increase, if you take my suggestion, would be take that out of the motion. So your motion would be to create two new line items, ADA planning and ADA improvements, and increase the general fund ADA planning by $50,000. I think that would accomplish what you're looking for. Then take a look when Urban Renewal Agency meets, take a look at doing a similar thing in Urban Renewal. And you've got some real money to put at this program.
So you're suggesting 50,000 into...
More.
Increased general fund.
From contingency to,
Let me state it again. Create two new line items in all funds that have ADA expenditures, the line items being ADA planning and ADA improvements, and further to increase ADA planning in the general fund by $50,000 and decrease contingency by a similar amount.
and move the currently budgeted ADA monies into those new lines.
Right.
I'll withdraw my motion in favor of one better worded.
I'm certainly not capable of restating this motion.
Never mind.
Are we able to capture it?
Mr. Ricketts, you can just amend the motion. I've got it captured.
Thank
I
you
mean,
so
can just
much, Madam Recorder.
just amend the motion, and then Mr. Sprague would have to second the amendment to the motion, and then we can vote.
Mr. Mayor, would you make a friendly amendment so that we have this in good wording?
Well, she's got it captured, so really
I have it
all we have to
captured.
agree is that you're willing to amend the motion as captured by the city recorder.
I'm certainly willing to do that.
I, too.
The motion has been amended by the author and the individual who has seconded the motion. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
to introduce a little cynicism into this discussion. Societally, IEDA is obviously a very good thing, and the more people we can include in the civic life, the better off we are. And I don't see any real problem with putting money into the actual improvements. But I will suggest to you that any money that you put into planning, it'll cost exactly that amount of money to write a master plan. If you put $200,000 in there, you'll get a $200,000 master plan. If you put $50,000 in there, you get a $50,000 master plan, most of which will never be implemented. I mean, I have participated in master plans here for 20 years, and most of them never happen. So what I would like to encourage you to do is to spend less time doing a plan, and enough of a one so there's the federal people or whoever has jurisdiction comes by and says, you don't have anything, you can say, yes, we do, and you can throw it at them. And there are numerous people in this community who are resources that can tell you where you could effectively spend money to improve your ADA capacity. I could think of 3 or 4 right off the top of my head that I think would give you some very good suggestions at no charge to yourself, and in which you could, unlike ODOT, you could spend your money, less money planning and more money doing. Thank you.
By the way, part of the plan is to engage those citizens. That will be part of the plan.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Further discussion? Hearing none, may we have a roll call vote, please, Madam Recorder?
Yes, you may. Dick Anderson,
Yes.
Gordon Eggleton,
Yes.
Lenny Nelson,
Yes.
Chester Norikis.
Yes.
Henry Quant,
Yes.
Dick Ricketts,
Yes.
Sue Ryan,
Yes.
Roger Sprague,
Yes.
James Taylor,
Yes.
Alex Ward,
Yes.
Susan Walke.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Eggleton, any comments, requests?
No, you've just taken care of what my comment would have been over.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan?
No, he did it.
All right. Mr. Quant?
Yeah, I got one question. On HE2, there's a line item that says pole building, plant to shop, and it shows $20,000. What's the status on that?
I'm sorry, on which?
On E2?
E2?
Yeah.
Which item now? I'm sorry.
Pole building, plant to shop, and it shows $20,000.
It's sitting in pieces.
I was wondering, because this has been 2 years now. It's the same conversation, and I say...
No, it was just torn down last year. It was put into pieces last year. It's sitting in the shop, waiting for the completion of the new building, which, by the way, I think is within days or weeks of being, the building itself is done. I think there's just site work to do.
Okay, I'm waiting to see the building go up, and I haven't seen it.
Okay, so that's Lila, do you have any comments on that? But while she comes up here, the most immediate thing and relief we're going to get is being able to put our equipment in that new building, which is almost complete?
Almost complete. We actually have our TV trailer parked in there to keep it heated.
And how about the pole building?
And the pole building, we have been waiting until we get through with the other building because the construction would be in conflict. Because it's right across the street, or right across the driveway from...
Are we going to get it done in this period, though?
We will.
We will get it done in the next 45 days?
No.
Did I leave it in the...
It didn't get carried, that's my question. It didn't get carried forward. That's my question.
Okay. I thought I...
No, it didn't get carried forward. It shows it's being spent this year, in this
We can see...
this last budget.
We can see how fast I can get that out to Vid.
Ooh, boy.
That one's going to be tight.
Good catch.
Good call.
I'm sitting here, I know it's got to come up eventually, but like I said, you're saying it's going to get it done in 45 days. I've watched you for 2 years now, and it hasn't gotten so far. It's kind of, come on now, you know.
And you're right.
Good catch. So either we're going to end up amending the budget at a future date, or we could do it now.
I make a motion to amend the budget for however that's supposed to be worded.
Which fund is that in?
It's in the Capital Replacement Fund, 252.
252. So, and that's on page, let's get out of E2 and get into the... Yeah. So we would roll forward, and that instead of that 580, is it in that 580?
I'm not positive it's in the 5.
Well, it's somewhere, folks. Okay, so...
Okay.
All right, so it would be to increase building improvements in fund, did we say it was 252? By $20,000. Now, to do that, that would require because we can't change, can you change the estimated year end? We can't change the estimated year end.
We don't spend it.
So decrease capital reserve by $20,000. So the 63,262 would be 43,262, and building improvements would be 20,000. But there'll be an underrun of that 580. So actually, it'll balance out over time.
Okay.
Okay.
And
Whatever you said, okay.
And do we need an amendment?
You either need amendment now, or the council's going to amend the budget next year.
What's
easier? Just amend it now?
Yeah.
I think Mr. Kwan actually made a motion, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, correct. Is there a second?
Second, yep.
We have a motion on the floor. Second. Discussion, please.
And was Kathy able to capture a quick, or Debbie? You got it.
Mr. Hawker can help me out if I fail to.
Yeah, let me go over it again real quickly. It would be in Fund 252 to increase the budget by $20,000 in the line item building improvements, to decrease the additional capital reserve item by $20,000.
That's the motion I seconded.
Thank you.
And I do really appreciate that. Sometimes we're optimistic when we start in the budget process about what we're going to get done.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. There's no further discussion. Roll call vote, please, Madam Recorder.
Dick Anderson?
Yes.
Eggleton?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Norikis?
Yes.
Want?
Yes.
Ricketts?
Yes.
Ryan? Sprague?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
And Walke?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Quant, for that catch. Ms. Walke, do you have comments or requests?
No further, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
I do. I had the ADA, and thank you, Mr. Sprague. The other was in the VCB. It's my desire, before I make motion, to increase the grants to nonprofits. I have VCB on page 55, but grants to nonprofits, which is currently $75,000, increase that by $25,000 to $100,000. Reason being is, as we phase out of the creating events ourselves, I guess I want to make sure that the nonprofits can that we have funding available to have them think creatively and fill that void of events, and that we can, in essence, write them a check to support new events. That's one. The other is then, we had the discussion, Mr. Rucker, trying to create the other fund or other line item for sponsorship of citywide events, and then to put just put $100,000 in that. So it's increase the nonprofit by 25 and create the, and I don't know what the right name would be, but a sponsor. But that one for profits, but where it and yet to be determined what the criteria to be, but at least
Yeah, I would just call that event sponsorships, add a new line item, and you would be decreasing contingency by an equivalent amount.
Yeah. Again, both those for the committee, my rationale is to make it easy, not in essence abandon events, but it makes it much cleaner by saying you can just, VCB conceivably could just write a check to an event that's being sponsored, that's good, determined to be good for the city. It's a lot cleaner type of approach, and while we're still being supportive. So that my motion then, unless I'd entertain any thoughts around that unless I'm stepping on something.
Second.
Mr. Chair, there's 25,000 plus how much more?
Well, right now that fund is already at 75, so I'm just increasing it to 100,000 for nonprofits, and then creating a second one at 100,000 for
Total of 125 then.
No, yes, of new money increase, yeah.
I would second that. Then a question is, can that be done this year in this current budget? Or I know this is what you were talking about is this coming year, but I'm just wondering if that is something that can be done this year.
Well, this year ends June 30th.
I know.
Okay.
I'm not asking to do anything. I'm just asking if it's possible to.
No, it's possible. Is it practical to have somebody bring forth something that they can develop that quick and conduct by June 30th? That'd be a stretch.
And I'm assuming you'd want to create some criteria around.
Yeah, and you'd have a contract. And so to do all that and have it happen by June 30th,
Well, I know a request was made.
Think about the pole building.
A request was made to the VCB for some funding for an event that's scheduled, but was turned down because it said that there was no funding for that. So I'm wondering if that is the case, or whether or not, if somebody has a for-profit activity that is scheduled, can the VCB actually provide some funding for that?
We maybe take that up
That's,
with Mr. Hawker.
That's hard to
after-
answer in the
yeah.
abstract, it really
Okay.
is.
and that's a change. Current budget is changed just by council. so
Yeah,
it would
you
be-
can't change the current budget.
but
Council
that-
can, but you... but
No, I
this
wasn't
committee-
looking for a change in the budget. I just wondered if it was something that process is in place today.
You can modify, the council can modify current year budget, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I've been around the circle, and there's a number of, it looks easy, and it turns out to be extraordinarily hard. And the reason it turns out to be extraordinarily hard is, first of all, you need to set up some criteria. If you don't set up criteria, then you almost have to do first come, first served, which means that some poorly funded, probably pie-in-the-sky ideas get funding, and some really good ones that come along later won't get funding. If you don't do it that way, then you have to set up a criteria. Now you start to think about what is your criteria. Does it have to serve the most people? Does it have to be in the off-season? There's a whole bunch of things that go along with this criteria setting that need to be thought out. And the downside of that is, if you don't have crisp criteria, and even if you do sometimes, there will be people who will be highly indignant that their project didn't get funded. And that's why it fell apart the first time. I was here, and I could even tell you the project, but I won't. And people come in with an expectation that because they showed up, that they're going to get the money. So I think if you're going to venture into this idea that you're going to transfer city taxpayer dollars or city dollars into other organizations, that you need to think clearly about what it is that you're going to set as a criteria of how that money is going to be transferred, who gets it, how do they get it, on what basis.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think the point's well taken, and I think both the VCB committee and the staff and the council, all three, are working very hard in this area, and I would imagine they would consider what Lenny had to say.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
So just to confirm, we're looking at an increase of 125.
125, two funds, 125.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I had expressed some concern about the size of the budget, which gets even bigger now. It's a $400,000 increase over current year and a 29% increase, so I just say I have some concern about that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not quite sure I understand what Mr. Taylor's saying. The amount of money the VCB gets is fixed by law. The only thing that can vary it is how much revenue we collect from the various motel properties. How they spend within that budget is something that can be varied up and down, which brought me to a question that I hadn't asked previously. If you're going to add this 125, where's it coming from? What do you line item you can take it out of?
We have the fund balance to cover it.
Okay, you can take it out of the ending or opening fund
Contingency.
or contingency. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Further discussion? Hearing none. We have a motion on the floor. We have a second. Madam Recorder, have you captured the motion?
Yes.
Would you be so kind as to
Yes.
read it for us?
Anderson will read the motion.
Please.
Motion to, the first, it's a two-part motion, a motion to increase grants to nonprofits, the VCB, by $5,000. And the second part of that motion is to create event sponsorships, a new line item in the amount of $100,000 and decreasing contingency by an equal amount.
Thank you so much. Roll call vote, please.
Anderson?
Yes.
Eggleton?
Yes.
Nelson?
No.
Norikis?
Yes.
Want? Yes.
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Sprague?
Yes.
Taylor?
No.
Ward?
Yes.
Walke? Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, any more comments,
Nope.
suggestions?
I'm good, and I'd like, before you just make some closing remarks before you close. Have you?
I'm not ready to close yet.
That's what I figured.
I think there's one more motion.
Please.
I do have a motion, and that is, I move that the Budget Committee approve a COLA increase in the amount of 3% for the city manager.
That's governed by contract that I have with the city.
Therefore, my motion is out of order.
Well, we have a cost of living increase in personnel expenses across the board in this budget.
All right.
Okay?
Then I withdraw my motion.
But, well, yeah, I just want to explain that we're under current contract with police, and that's established, what the cost of living will be by contract. We're beginning negotiations with ASME, which will govern what cost of living they get. Non-represented generally get what ASME gets. My contract calls for a similar cost of living. Department heads, and I misspoke at the very first committee meeting. Since you brought it up, I'm just taking the opportunity to correct something.
Thank you.
That I had said that most department heads did not get cost of living, and I did not get it. I should have said all department heads did not get cost of living, and I did not get it. But that is in the budget at the current time. It is implicit in this budget.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'm ready to make a couple of motions regarding approval of property tax and of the budget. Your comments, would you like to comment before that?
Nope, I'll go right after, if that's all right.
All right. Then I move that we, the Budget Committee, approve the property tax rate in the amount of 4.0996, I believe. Very good. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please, Madam Recorder.
Anderson?
If I could, I'm sorry, discussion, is that, I'm questioning whether the motion is needed, since we heard earlier that it's affixed by...
You can go down.
It's permanent, but it can be reduced.
You could go down.
It can't.
Gotcha.
It can't be
Incorrect.
increased,
Thank
but
you.
You could.
We'll firm it up. I vote in the affirmative. Yes.
Thank you. How about Mr. Eggleton?
Yes.
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 Quant?
Yes.
Ricketts?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Sprague?
Yep.
Taylor?
Yes.
Ward? And Walke? Motion carries.
Thank you. I also move that the Budget Committee approve the Lincoln City budget as amended, 2012-2013 Lincoln City budget.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please, Madam Recorder.
Anderson?
Yes.
Eggleton?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Norikis?
Yes.
Quant?
Yes.
Ricketts?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Sprague?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
And Walke? Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, what I wanted to do was thank the committee members for putting up with us these last 3 evenings. Come to roughly 7 plus 9 hours of work plus prep time prior to these meetings, and it's not easy, but at least it's concentrated. So I appreciate the service of all you, and especially, well, all of you. I understand that many of you are new to the Budget Committee, so I certainly appreciate you spending the time. And, Mr. Chairman, once again, you've done an excellent job. Everything's gone smooth, and I appreciate your leadership with this Budget Committee.
Thank you so much.
I guess the other thing is before we adjourn, I would be most interested if we could have just a brief synopsis of, perhaps from committee members, what was missing, because this is the first time you've seen the budget. What might have you been expecting that wasn't in the document? It would be a way to make sure next year, we can either look at it, but it's a big, again, I've gotten used to it, so it always helps with, fresh eyes to see, was there something lacking that you would have liked to, whether it's graphs, explanations. So I'm looking to refine the document, advise Mr. Hawker, and we just never, once we break from here, we won't see you until next year at this time.
Floor is open for suggestions, comments. Mr. Sprague.
I have a comment. It's probably not really on what the mayor has just said, but historically speaking, I'm going back now to the early 80s. This is really refreshing to have the budget passed on to the city council without any dissenting votes. We had a gentleman that served on the budget committee for year after year after year, and he voted no every time. And I don't know whether it was just a protest or what it was, but we never once had a unanimous vote to pass the budget on, and I just think this is refreshing.
Thank you. Anybody else?
And you know who I'm talking about.
Mr. Ryan, yeah.
No, it wasn't Mr. Ryan.
Oh, no, Wes was telling me tonight, he remembers the years that he was on the city council, and he's looked at the budget book, he thought it was so well laid out. Mr. Hawker was going to tell you after the meeting, I'll tell you now. And he thought it was really great from the old days.
Nice.
Further suggestions?
One thing that we do, we do a lot of things that we don't give you because we just don't want to make it so voluminous. But one thing that kind of jumped out at me during this process that I think would help next time, we have a spreadsheet that lists every capital improvement. We could put that in the appendix. So it lists all capital improvements in any fund. And that, since we already have it, we just stick it in there next year.
That would be appreciated, I think.
That would work.
Anybody else? Last chance. Hearing none, I'd like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank the budget officer / city manager for another thoughtful, well-written budget message and another year of exceptional financial management. I'd also like to thank the department heads and the staff who contributed to this budget. And I'd like to thank Mr. Tierney and Debbie Mamoni for keeping track of a very complex series of funds and bonds and paying off a number of these bonds early, resulting in significant savings to the city. I'd also like to thank all the members of the committee for your work and your willingness to volunteer for this work. And with that, with no objection, I will adjourn the Budget Committee.
Great. Thank you.